Welcome to OOTO TV, the out-of-the-office investigation from the past into the future of personal health and actualization. This time, we're discussing the influence of thoughts on water. I'm your host, and I'm here with my co-host.
It's great to be here.
And wow, this is a topic that sits right on the edge. It's at the intersection of spirituality, wellness, and some of the most advanced, and let's be honest, controversial theoretical physics out there.
It absolutely is. And that's why today we're going to investigate it from every possible angle. We'll kick things off with the foundational experiments, the ones that are just so visually stunning that really brought this whole idea into the public eye. Then we're going to give a fair hearing to the very strong scientific skepticism that, immediately met those claims. And finally, we're going to venture into a truly mind-bending potential explanation, one that comes from a field of quantum biology that suggests our consciousness, well, it may have a much more direct role in shaping reality than we ever thought possible.
Okay, so let's just jump right in with the central question that really frames our entire investigation today. Can your thoughts physically change the world around you? And let's be clear, we are not talking about some abstract philosophy here, or just the power of positive thinking to change your own attitude or behavior. No. We are asking if an intention, a feeling, or even a single word spoken out loud could literally alter the molecular structure of matter itself. Right, and that is such a radical question, because it just shatters the fundamental wall we all assume exists between our minds and physical matter. The standard scientific view is that consciousness is something that happens in the brain. It's a byproduct of chemistry inside our skulls, and it doesn't directly influence the outside world, except, through our actions. This question suggests something completely different. Exactly. It suggests it's a two-way street, that consciousness isn't just a passive observer of the universe, but an active participant in it. If the answer to this question is yes, even in a small way, it could completely rewrite our understanding of consciousness and its role in the cosmos. And it all begins with the simplest, most vital substance for life we know: water.
So just take a look at this. These images are really the foundation of this entire conversation. On the left side, you see a water crystal that was formed after being exposed to the words, "thank you." And it's beautiful. It's symmetrical, intricate, it looks like a perfect natural snowflake. Then on the right, you see the result from water that was exposed to the phrase, "you make me sick." And it's a distorted, chaotic, fragmented mess. The contrast is just undeniable. The thank you crystal is all about harmony and order. The "you make me sick" image feels dissonant, broken. It almost looks diseased, And it's this visual evidence, this really stark difference, that first grabbed the public's imagination and kicked off so much of this debate. You really don't need a PhD in chemistry to just look at these two pictures and see that one is visually harmonious and the other is the absolute opposite.
And this is all the fascinating and, yes, highly controversial work of the late Japanese researcher Masaru Emoto. He was the one who pioneered these experiments. His method was to take samples of water, often from different sources, expose them to all sorts of stimuli, words typed on paper, images, different kinds of music, and then he'd freeze tiny droplets of that water. And right at that moment of freezing, he would photograph them under a dark field microscope. So he was essentially trying to capture the water's structure at that precise moment of transformation from liquid to solid. The idea being that the information, or the energy from the stimulus, would somehow be encoded in that frozen structure. Precisely. And what he claimed was that the results were incredibly consistent. Positive stimuli, things like classical music or words like love and gratitude, they produced these beautiful, complex, snowflake-like crystals. And negative stimuli, like heavy metal music or insults, produced these ugly, incomplete forms, just like the ones we just saw.
And all this led Emoto to his core claims. He proposed that water is so much more than just a chemical compound, H2O. He actually called it a blueprint for our reality, suggesting that it acts as a kind of liquid memory bank for the planet. The absolute heart of his theory is that what he called emotional energies or vibrations, basically the intention behind words, thoughts, and sounds, can directly alter the physical, molecular structure of water. It's almost as if the water is listening, in a way. Like it's receiving the information from the intention and then reflecting that information in its physical form. So positive intentions create these beautiful, orderly crystals, while negative intentions create these distorted, asymmetrical messes. It's a very poetic idea, isn't it? That water physically holds a memory of the emotion it was exposed to? It is. And it's an idea that, as beautiful as it is, ran smack into a giant wall of scientific opposition.
And you can definitely see why. I mean, as you can imagine, these claims were met with just intense skepticism from the mainstream scientific community. The very idea that consciousness can have a direct causal effect on matter, it just flies in the face of conventional materialism. That's the dominant philosophy in science, which basically says that consciousness is purely a byproduct of brain chemistry. So Emoto's work wasn't just some quirky finding, it was a direct challenge to a foundational belief of modern science. Yeah, it's a total paradigm-level challenge. If he's right, then the current paradigm is at the very least incomplete.
Exactly. And critics, like the biochemist William Reville of University College Cork, they summed up the mainstream position pretty bluntly. He just said, "It is very unlikely that there is any reality behind claims of Emoto." Now, the criticisms really centered on two big points. First, the lack of publication in mainstream, peer-reviewed scientific journals. For a discovery this extraordinary, you would expect to see it rigorously tested and documented in huge journals like Nature or Science, and it never was. And the second major point was about the methodology, right? The way the experiments were actually done.
Correct.
The experimental designs were seen as being highly prone to human error and, even more importantly, experimenter bias. Critics argued that in any given batch of frozen water droplets, you're naturally going to find a wide variety of crystal formations. Some will be beautiful, some will be average, some will be ugly. So it would be very easy for an experimenter, even subconsciously, to just cherry-pick the pretty crystals from the positive water sample and the ugly ones from the negative sample, and in doing so, create the very result they were hoping to find. Without really strict double-blind protocols, the results are just considered scientifically invalid.
Okay, but now this is where the counter-argument gets really interesting, and it addresses that very critique. Proponents of this kind of work suggest that we need to make a distinction between genuine, healthy skepticism and something they call pseudo-skepticism. So according to this view, a genuine skeptic is someone who bravely challenges the existing mainstream beliefs. Think of Galileo questioning the idea that the sun revolves around the Earth. They question the prevailing worldview. A pseudo-skeptic, on the other hand, is someone who just reflexively attacks and denies anything that challenges the mainstream, often with really hostile language, acting as a kind of ideological gatekeeper for the established order. Okay, so it's the difference between questioning authority and defending authority. One pushes science into new, unknown territory, and the other, according to this argument, tries to keep defenses built up around the current paradigm.
And that leads to a really fascinating point made by the physicist M. Pitkinen. He argues that the absence of scientific publication often reflects the fact that pseudo-skeptics have reached their goal to prevent publishing anything challenging their beliefs. So, in other words, the reason this kind of paradigm-shifting research might not be in the mainstream journals isn't always because the research is bad, but because the gatekeepers of mainstream science are so ideologically opposed to the conclusions that they actively block its publication. He suggests this mindset is a huge barrier to exploring phenomena that just don't fit into the standard materialist model of reality. That's a pretty serious charge. It's basically implying that the system of peer review can sometimes act as a system of censorship for ideas that are just considered too radical. It's a very complex debate, for sure. But for the sake of our investigation today, let's just set aside that skepticism for a moment. Let's operate from the assumption that the effects are real and ask the next most important question. You're listening to OOTT TV with research by author Paul Bulow.
So, if we proceed with that assumption that these effects are real, we are left with a massive, massive question. How? How can the influence of thoughts on water possibly work? I mean, what could the physical mechanism actually be? And to even begin to answer that, we have to go to the absolute frontiers of theoretical physics, to a controversial, incredibly complex, and all-encompassing idea called topological geometrodynamics, or TGD for short. Okay, whoa, you're gonna have to slow way down here. That is a mouthful, and it sounds incredibly abstract. We've gone from looking at these beautiful, simple pictures of ice crystals to topological geometrodynamics. That feels like a gigantic leap. It is a huge leap, I know, and I promise we'll walk through it step by step. TGD is basically an attempt by the physicist Matti Pitkanen to create a theory of everything that unifies all of physics, and, this is the crucial part, includes consciousness as a fundamental aspect of the universe, not just some random byproduct of biology. And it proposes some truly radical ideas about the nature of living matter.
Wait, a magnetic body? What on earth is that? Is that like an aura? That sounds pretty esoteric for a physics theory. It does, I know, but the theory describes it in very specific physical terms. Think about it this way. Our ordinary physical body, the one made of atoms and molecules, that's like the hardware of a computer. The magnetic body, or MB, is like the software and the cloud service all rolled into one. It's a field of energy and a specific type of dark matter that surrounds and interpenetrates our physical body. And according to TGD, this magnetic body is the actual boss. It's the master controller, the quantum blueprint that directs all the processes of our biological body. Okay, the hardware-software analogy actually helps a lot. So this MB isn't just a passive field. It's an active control system. But then how does it communicate with the hardware? How does it talk to our physical body? It communicates using something the theory calls dark photons.
I know the jargon on the slide is dense. Different value of Planck's constant is a very, very technical term. So let's try a simpler analogy. Imagine regular light is like an old AM/FM radio signal. It travels, sure, but it gets scattered and loses strength pretty quickly. Dark photons, in this analogy, are like a perfect encrypted Wi-Fi signal. They are dark not because they're spooky or evil, but because they operate on a different frequency of reality, you might say, that doesn't really interact with our normal matter in the usual ways. This allows them to carry complex information, like the very specific intention of love or hate, over long distances without any distortion. So our magnetic body, our software, uses these dark photon Wi-Fi signals to send instructions and information to our physical body, the hardware. Is that the basic idea? That's the core idea. And this isn't just about communication inside our own body. The theory proposes that our magnetic body can connect with the magnetic bodies of other systems, other people, plants, and yes, even a sample of water. But for that water to receive the signal, it has to be in a very, very special state.
Okay, so you're saying that water is somehow tuned in to these dark photons? That it's hypersensitive to this invisible information? Exactly. The theory proposes that living matter, and especially the water inside and around it, exists in a state called quantum criticality. The best analogy I've heard for this is a pencil that's perfectly balanced on its very tip. It's in a state of extreme instability and sensitivity. The tiniest puff of air, the slightest vibration, is going to cause it to fall in a specific direction. Water in this critical state is just like that pencil. It's exquisitely sensitive to the tiniest, most subtle energetic signals, like the dark photons being sent by a magnetic body. It effectively becomes a perfect quantum antenna. Right. It's like a radio receiver that is perfectly tuned to a specific station. And because our own bodies are about 70% water, this theory suggests that when we expose ourselves to positive intentions, whether they're coming from other people or just from our own thoughts, we are essentially tuning our own biological receivers to a harmonious frequency. So this could be a potential physical mechanism behind why positive social interactions and just having a positive mindset literally make us feel better and think more clearly. It wouldn't just be psychology, it could actually be physics. That is precisely the implication. The theory states that exposure to a healthy influence of thoughts on water improves your social mood and your mental ability to share ideas and thoughts. It's not just affecting the water in a petri dish over there. It's about engaging with what might be a fundamental communication system of life itself.
Now, I know this has all been incredibly theoretical. We've been talking about magnetic bodies, dark photon Wi-Fi, quantum criticality. It's a lot to take in. But what's so fascinating is that people have tried to find more tangible, real-world evidence for these effects, moving beyond microscopic photos of frozen water to something you could literally try in your own kitchen: rice. Okay, good. This sounds like a much more grounded way to test the idea. It takes it out of a specialized laboratory and brings it into everyday life.
Exactly. An artist and researcher named Sammy Dougherty conducted a version of this now famous experiment. The setup is really simple. She prepared 4 jars with cooked rice and water, basically creating an environment that's perfect for decomposition. She then labeled each jar with a different intention: love, acceptance, hate, and money. And then for 30 days, she simply directed the corresponding thought and spoke the word to each jar. The whole point was to see if that intentional energy, the vibration of the words, would have a measurable effect on how the rice decomposed over a month.
And the visual results are, again, just absolutely stunning. The hate jar is disgusting. It's covered in this black and red, toxic-looking mold. It just rotted. But the love jar remained almost perfectly pristine and white. It didn't rot. Instead, it looks like it began to ferment, which is a life-affirming process that creates things we actually enjoy, like sourdough or kombucha. The difference is just night and day, and it's much harder to argue that someone is cherry-picking the results when you're looking at an entire jar of moldy rice versus a clean one.
So how does our wild TGD framework even begin to explain this? This brings us back to the theory. It suggests this isn't just about good vibes versus bad vibes. It proposes a concept called bioharmony. The idea here is that emotions are not just subjective psychological states, they actually have a specific mathematical structure, kind of like a musical chord. Positive emotions, like love and gratitude, correspond to harmonious, resonant musical chords. Negative emotions, like hate and fear, are like dissonant, clashing, ugly noise. So the water and the rice are simply responding to the underlying mathematical harmony, or lack of harmony, that's being transmitted by the intention. It's like a universal language of frequency that even a non-sentient jar of rice can apparently understand. That's the theory. It's a literal music of life written in the language of physics. You're listening to OOTTO-TV with research by author Paul Bulot.
Okay, let's move to the final piece of this incredible puzzle and see how it all builds together. We've seen the phenomenon in water and rice, and we've explored a potential quantum framework for it. But let's get really specific now about the mechanism. We have to ask, what are the key elements for the influence of thoughts on water? How does a thought that starts in our head actually end up creating a beautiful crystal in a distant petri dish?
The TGD theory proposes a specific four-step process, so let's break it down using our analogies. First, quantum entanglement. When you focus your attention on the water, you create an invisible energy link, these magnetic flux tubes, between your magnetic body and the water. It's like establishing a direct Wi-Fi connection between you and the jar. Second, attention as energy. Your loving attention isn't just a passive thought, it actively sends metabolic energy through that link, sort of powering up the water system and making it more receptive to information. Okay, so first you connect, and then you power it up. What's next? Third is emotional imprinting. The specific music of your emotion, that bioharmony of love or the dissonance of hate, is then transmitted as information through that dark photon Wi-Fi connection. And finally, structural formation. This music acts as a blueprint. It organizes the dark matter part of the water, which then acts as a template, guiding the ordinary water molecules into a harmonious crystalline pattern as they freeze.
So this implies it's not a passive or mechanical process at all. It means your own mindset is a critical ingredient. You can't just mechanically say the word love while you're feeling angry or distracted and expect a perfect crystal. The theory would demand that the influence of thoughts on water requires a healthy amount of positive attitude to facilitate best results. The intention has to be genuine, it has to be coherent.
Exactly. And it's not a fleeting one-off event. Just like we saw in that 30-day rice experiment, the most dramatic effects seem to come from sustained intention over time. This means the influence of thoughts on water requires consistent positive energy to be active and healthy. It's more like building a relationship with the water or tending to a garden than it is just flipping a light switch. A fleeting positive thought might not be strong enough to create a coherent signal, but sustained, focused intention, that's what builds the connection and transmits the information clearly.
This really suggests a strong similarity to practices like meditation or mindfulness. A scattered, distracted mind would presumably send a really noisy, incoherent signal. But a calm, focused state of attention would allow for the clearest, strongest connection. So it makes perfect sense that, as the theory suggests, the influence of thoughts on water requires the ability to have periods of calm, thoughtful focus to be at maximum productive health. It's in that state of inner quiet that the signal of your intention can be transmitted with the most power and fidelity.
So, let's try to bring this all together. We started with the very provocative phenomenon from Masaru Emoto, which suggests our thoughts can physically shape water. We acknowledged the fierce scientific debate with very valid criticisms about methodology on one side, and then accusations of suppressive pseudo-skepticism on the other. And then we journeyed into this mind-bending quantum theory, TGD, which attempts to provide a physical mechanism through these wild concepts like magnetic bodies, dark photons, and a universal bioharmony. It's a huge arc, from simple photographs to a potential theory of everything. And the crucial point, which we've touched on, is that this isn't just about water in a jar. Our bodies are approximately 70% water by mass. And that makes this entire exploration deeply, profoundly personal.
And that leaves us with the final, powerful question we want you to consider. If our thoughts and our emotions can indeed imprint on external water, creating either harmony or chaos, then what are we constantly, silently imprinting on the vast ocean of water that makes up our very own bodies? That completely reframes our internal monologue, doesn't it? That constant stream of thoughts, feelings, self-criticism, or self-compassion we all experience every single day. It might not just be psychological noise. According to this theory, it could be a constant act of physical creation or destruction happening within our own cells. It invites us to think about that silent, constant conversation happening between our consciousness and our biology, and the profound power we might hold over our own health and well-being.
And that is a truly staggering thought to end on.